on the concept of conflict analysis, and we looked at other aspects of it. And for today, we'll be looking at the approaches to conflict analysis. So, in undertaking any form of conflict analysis, what are the approaches that you may adapt when you want to do any form of analysis of a given conflict, right? So that's what this session is about. So there are some three main approaches that one can use in analyzing a given conflict. So the three main approaches, we have the human needs approaches, the human needs approach, the Harvard approach, and then we also have the conflict transformation approach, right? So all these are various approaches or techniques that, depending on the school of thought you belong to, you may want to adopt, or depending on the kind of conflict you are dealing with, you may want to adopt the approach or the technique that suits you, so that you'll be able to analyze the conflict properly. So so we'll begin first of all by looking at the Harvard approach. So basically, the Harvard approach to conflict analysis is basically interested in two main things, right? Look at the positions and interests of the conflicting parties, right? So when you have a conflict and you want to analyze it using the Harvard approach, what basically the Harvard approach is saying that this approach basically looks at two main things within the conflict. What are the positions of the individuals? What is their standpoint? What are their views? What are they saying regarding the conflict? And then also, what are their interests? What is the interest of the conflicting parties? What are they saying that they want, or that should be done, or things that they need to be done, or things that they feel is not there, that is bringing this conflict, right? So position basically refers to what people explicitly state they want. So what the people want is the position, and then interest delve into the underlying of the individual, or a particular individual is the actual ruler or overlord of Boku, right? What are the underlying reasons that they are, or the motivations behind that position they've taken, that is the rightful chief of the Boku traditional area, right? So positions and interests are very important when you want to analyze a conflict. Then you'll be able to understand what the people want, and then why they are saying they want what they want, right? So, for example, when you take the Boku conflict as a case study, I think somewhere within the past 2-3 weeks, the court case involving the individual who has been, taken by the national security, and his subjects cannot identify or locate where he is. After the court, some of the members of that faction, some were giving reasons why they feel that man is the actual, overlord or the ruler of the Boku area, right? Some were giving historical antecedents, indicating or giving a breakdown of the of the kinship, how that has evolved from I think from the 17 something, the year 17 something, where the actual kinship began, and how this current uh, man who has been incarcerated is a descendant of all these people from the year 17 something to date, right? So those are their reasons they are giving, and they feel that that alone should solidify their position that, I mean, the gentleman is the actual, I mean, overlord or ruler of the Boku area, right? So with the Harvard approach, those are the two main things you should be interested in when you want to look at any conflict. What are the positions of the people, and what are their interests, right? Then we also have the human needs approach. So just as the name suggests, the human needs approach, I mean, is basically interested in the needs of the people, right? So the approach recognizes that basic needs are crucial for survival, but extends beyond mere survival to emphasize the needs for conditions that enable individuals to realize their full potential. So the human needs approach basically, when you are using this approach, you want to be interested in the needs of the people. What is it that the people do not have or that is missing, that is creating this chaos or conflict within the community, right? So maybe, for example, people cannot get access to land, or their lands have been taken over by a private individual. So you go into a community where people depend on the land for farming and all that, and then one day, all of a sudden, a private developer comes to take over that land that he or she wants to put up some, some structure and things like that. People might revolt and then oppose it, that no, this is our source of income, this is the source of our livelihood. And one person, by means of his or her connection, has taken over the land, right? I mean, people will fight, and this has happened across many places across the country, right? So, for example, the Fulani Agogo conflict, right? The Agogo conflict, where, the indigenous of this degenerated into a serious conflict. The issue was that the indigenous felt that the Fulanis are not indigenous of the town. However, their farms and things have been taken over by the Fulani herdsmen, the cattle, and the cattle are destroying their food crops, destroying all their investments on their farm. This degenerated into a conflict. So for such a conflict, if you want to analyze that conflict as an expert, maybe one of the suitable approaches that will be useful for you is a humanist approach, to probably understand the needs of the people, right? And how the lack of it, may create chaos and all that. So you look at the natural environment, the cultural context. So culturally, the Fulani people do not hail from Agogo, right? So these are migrants, right? And they have come there to look at that. So you look at it culturally, from that cultural context, and how that has fueled the conflict. So you can also look at issues of political and economic conditions. So like we mentioned, people have made a lot of investment into their farms. People went for loans to, invest in their farms, buy fertilizer at expensive prices, get tractors and machines to plow the land, and all these are investments. And then, someone brings his or her cattle to, destroy all these investments. That will be, a source of conflict. So the humanist approach basically focuses on that aspect, so that you'll be able to understand the needs of the people, either from an economic standpoint, or a political standpoint, or a cultural standpoint. Then the third approach basically is a conflict transformation approach. So the conflict transformation approach, as the name suggests, you want to transform the situation, right? So this approach views conflict as interactions that can either be destructive or constructive, depending on how one deals with it or transforms them. So, depending on how you look at the conflict, either you want to transform it, and when you transform it, it can either be constructive, which can lead to the growth and development of the people, or it can also degenerate and become very destructive. So, this approach emphasizes that we need to understand the different perceptions of the conflicting parties and how their reality is socially and culturally constructed, right? So you have two different groups that are fighting. First of all, we need to understand their perspectives or their perceptions, right? So that may include their interests, their positions, and how both of them are constructing their social reality or cultural reality, right? Because once you understand this, the end goal is that you want to give each and every party the opportunity so that, I mean, you'll be able to transform or resolve the conflict. So if the conflict is probably about a land dispute, for example, and you've contacted party A, they are saying that, well, the land belongs to us because it was given to us by our forefathers. And this is where we've been farming for years, right? And then the party B also says, no, the land belongs to us. We were the original settlers on this land. And then maybe due to famine and drought and all that, we relocated to another place. And now we are back to where we belong, right? So as a conflict expert using the transformative approach, okay, fine, you've listened to both parties and they've all shared their perspective regarding the issue, right? And then in order to probably deal with the conflict, maybe you suggest to them that, well, the land in itself, well, it's a necessity. So why not maybe probably put up a school or a clinic on this land so that both of you, both sides can have access to it and then can all benefit from it. So you've transformed the situation, right, from something which they were all fighting over to something that is benefiting all of them, right? So basically, that's how the conflict transformative approach, I mean, is used to analyze the conflict. So that at the end of the day, you want to transform the situation so that, I mean, it benefits both parties. But the point is that if you do not approach it carefully, then the situation can degenerate and become even much more violent. So in trying to use this approach, you have to be very circumspect on how you go about it. Of course, you have to talk to both parties. So for instance, if you don't talk to both parties and you just talk to one side, then the tendency that the other party might construe it to be biased will be high, and then whatever thing you decide to put up there, whether a school or hospital or a clinic or whatever, I mean, if you're not careful, the other party will go and burn it down because, I mean, you didn't consult them. You didn't consult them, so they don't see the need why that thing should be there, and they'll destroy it, and then it might even degenerate into something else. So basically, that's how the conflict transformative approach works. So the end goal is to transform the situation so that, I mean, it benefits both parties. So the conflict transformative approach places its main emphasis on promoting peace and improving relations between conflicting parties rather than solely focusing on security aspects. So just like I mentioned, the end goal is that you want to promote peace. So if both parties agree that, well, okay, since we are both fighting over this land and we have people from both sides who are dying, well, if you want to put up a hospital the government wants to put up a hospital, which will benefit all of us, because even at the end of the day, we don't even have a hospital, a clinic in our community, and it's going to benefit all of us. Why not? And then that in itself is going to ensure that there is peace, and it's going to improve relations between both parties, because at the end of the day, they are all going to access that facility, right? So that's how the conflict transformative approach works. Is there any question to this point?
No, sir.
All right. So we'll move to the next session. And here, basically, we'll be looking at the challenges of conflict analysis. So having looked at all the issues on the, trying to analyze the conflict, the approaches, and all that, we have to know that there are some challenges that we might encounter as conflict analysts or conflict experts. Because in every situation, I mean, some challenges might definitely pop up. And we need to be aware of some of these challenges, and also understand how we can overcome these challenges as and when we encounter them within any given situation. So one of the challenges that is likely to pop up is that you have to respect people's emotions, right? If you don't respect the emotions of people, so like yesterday, if you recall, I mentioned that. So, for instance, you've gone to the field and you want to interact or interview people regarding the situation within the conflict zone, and then the person starts talking, and the person starts crying. You can visibly see the person is emotionally devastated, but still you want to go ahead and, you know, interview the person. I mean, in itself, in research, I mean, that is not right, because you are putting the person in, you are harming the person, not physically but emotionally and mentally, psychologically. That is harm. So you have to respect their emotions. Or for example, you go there and then you've spoken to one person, and then someone says, "Oh, for me, I've lost about 10 family members as a result of this conflict." And then you go to the next place and you're interviewing the person and said, "Oh, me, as for me, I just lost one person." And you say, "Hey," then your response is like, "Hey, then you are lucky." I mean, that is not good, because I mean, a loss of life, you can't compare any loss of life in any way in terms of numbers. Even one loss of life is not a good thing. So as a conflict analyst, as a researcher, I mean, on the field, engaging people in conflict zones and all that, I mean, you need to respect their emotions, right? And then also you need to be transparent about the process in all your dealings as a researcher in the conflict zone. You need to be very transparent about the processes, right? I mean, one way is that you need to be candid with the people, what you are doing. You don't need to hide, I mean, some relevant information from the people on what exactly you are doing. You need to be very transparent, because once you are transparent, the chances that you get, I mean, viable information or reliable information, credible information is very high. So you need to be very, very transparent. And then another challenge is that you need to gather information from, I mean, a wide range of sources, and then also listen to various, I mean, actors, right, to gain a comprehensive understanding of the situation. That can be challenging, right? So gathering information from all these sources. So if you have to talk to about 300 people, these 300 people may include probably individuals, institutions, community leaders, you know, and all that. That can be a challenge, especially in a situation where, I mean, you are you do not have enough resources and funds because you need to pay your research assistants and field workers, and you don't have enough funding to support all these people. That can be challenging when you want to deal with a lot of stakeholders within the situation. That can be very challenging, right? So that can be one of the challenges, right? Maybe you need to travel from one community to the other. So, for example, in a situation where there are curfews, all over the town, and you cannot easily move from point A to point B. And as a necessity, you need to really get information from people. And some of these people are in places where there are curfews. That can be a challenge because then at the end of the day, you might not get all the requisite information needed to, include in your report and all that. And that can be challenging. So imagine you get all the information you are getting it from just one side of the conflicting parties. That can be very challenging. So gathering information from a large source and from a lot of people can also be a challenge, right? And then also, you also need to, one of the challenges is that reliability of the information you get can also be problematic, right? In conflict situations, people are emotional and all that. So people might want to say or give you information that they feel they want to give you, or they feel for them from their point of view is the right thing. And that can also be a challenge, right? If you don't get reliable information from diverse sources, that can be very challenging. So, for example, when you have gatekeepers, so gatekeepers basically these are people who are within the community. So, the example of gatekeepers can be community leaders, right? An assemblyman, for example, can be a community leader, can be a gatekeeper. So, you go into the community, you first of all need to announce your presence, because if you're an outsider and someone finds you moving around from place, if you're not careful, you can be harmed, because then people might mistaking you for someone else, right? So as a way of community entry, you need to see either the assemblyman or the local chief or a community elder, and these are people who can give you information on places maybe probably you should go and places that you should not go. But the likelihood that the information they might give you, for example, regarding the conflict situation, the information can be highly biased, and that in itself might not be credible and reliable. So that can be a challenge, right? That can be a challenge, right? So that is also one challenge you might encounter as a field, as a conflict expert in the field. And then another challenge that you might also encounter is who to involve, right? Who to involve in your research or in your data collection can also be problematic, right? Because if you don't choose the right people to talk to, that can be challenging. So, for example, you go and you just talk to just ordinary community members. Ordinary community members. Well, they might give you information, but probably that information might not be rich enough. It might not be detailed. It might not be in depth. So your information you are getting will be face value information. It might not be in depth information. So that can also be a challenge, right? So who to involve is also very important, because if you don't involve the right persons, at the end of the day, if you're not careful, the recommendations on your actionable, recommendations you want to give to the government or whoever is in charge for implementation, that might be challenging, right? So, you have stakeholders, you have community leaders, you have ordinary community members, local authorities, NGOs, and if you have all these people, that can be challenging, in two ways. One, if you don't use the right people, or if you don't consult the right people, that can be challenging. And then also, if you want to involve all the people, that can also be a challenge, because then you have to look at the resources available to you. You have to look at the resources available to you. If you don't have the requisite funds or money or resources to move around, for example, you don't have a car. You don't have a car to be traveling from one point to the other. I mean, that might be challenging, because if you have about, you are supposed to interview about 50 people in a day, and then you have to move from one community to the other, taking information from all these people, that might be challenging, right? So who to involve is also very important. If you're not careful, that can be a challenge to you. Then also another challenge that you might encounter is the scope of the analysis. So you've gathered your data. If you've gathered your data, the analysis you want to run is very important. It can become a challenge. So if, for example, you have about, let's say you've interviewed about 200 people. 200 people interview, that's a lot of information. Because at the end of the day, now you have to come and transcribe the data. Because once you do the interview, you will record it on an audio recorder. You have to come and transcribe. The transcription alone is a lot of work. So, for example, a proper interview, 30 minutes interview, if you want to transcribe a 30 minutes interview, that can be about between 20 to 25 pages. If you have done proper in-depth interview of 30 minutes, transcription can be within 20 to 25 pages. So imagine you have about 200 interviews across the whole community. That's a huge amount of data you'll be dealing with. And that can become a big challenge, because if you don't have a lot of field research staff who the work can be, split to, that can become very, challenging for you, because then at the end of the day, you'll be dealing with a lot of data that you might not be able to have grasp over it properly. So that can become very challenging, right? So that the scope of the analysis can also become a challenge. And then also multiple actors and biases. So if you are dealing with multiple actors, multiple individuals, and all these people come with their own biases, that can become challenging, because then the credibility and reliability of the data you are getting can become a challenge. Even though sometimes it's good to talk to multiple actors. We are not saying it's not good to talk to multiple actors. It's good, because when you talk to different set of people, it gives you some kind of diverse information. The information is diverse. So the information is not just coming from one person. It's coming from multiple people. So you can be able to triangulate the information and see who is saying what and who is saying what. But sometimes when you have a lot of actors, that can also become a challenge. It can become a challenge in that some of these actors might also come with their own biases, right? And then once their biases influence the data, the information you have at the end of the day, might not be credible, because then people's interests are in there. People's interests. So people will speak or give you the information based on what they feel should be done. So, for example, if one party might say that, well, if the government, so for example, in the case of the Boko conflict, where I've forgotten his name, but the one who has been put in prison, who has been taken out by the security forces, and his people are fighting for his release. that group have their own interest. The other group also have their own interest. So sometimes, if you are not careful, everybody has their own interest. So if you are not careful, at the end of the day, we cannot have, we cannot come to a conclusion. And it's one of the reasons why the conflict has persisted for all these years, because everyone is fighting for his or her interest. This person saying that no, we are the rightful rulers. The other party saying no, we are the rightful rulers, and all that. So they are all coming with their own biases, and then government will always have to bring in Otumfuo Committee, National Peace Council, the security forces, and all these groups just to ensure that the conflict is resolved. But because of the biases of these people, and some people are also saying that this conflict has political undertones. When one party is in power, one group is benefiting. When the other party is in power, so all these biases is at play. So that can be very challenging when you want to, analyze this conflict and draw some proper recommendations that should be put in place. And it's a very reason why the Otumfuo's committee recommendations was not accepted by one party, because one party feels that something they've been not consulted or something was not done, and or their views were not properly heard and all that. So it's the very reason why the recommendations, one party is kicking against it. So multiple actors sometimes can bring about some of these biases, and that can be very challenging to you as a conflict expert or conflict analyst. And then the issue of politicization. So just like I mentioned, NDC, MPP, right? There's a perception that the Mamprusi groups are lean or they are MPP people, and then the Kusasi is NDC. So there's no way, there will be peace. Once there's this political, insinuations and, things under there or beneath the actual conflict itself, it will be very difficult for one group to accept that, okay, well, we've agreed, we'll live together peacefully and all that. So that is also a major challenge to the conflict in itself, right? That is a major challenge. So depending on which party is in power, one conflicting party will gain more influence and power, right? So in such situations, as a conflict analyst, you may face a lot of challenges when you want to address this conflict impartially and objectively. And if you're not careful, if you, the conflict analyst, you yourself, you are, even though as an academic, you are supposed to be impartial and all that, if you're not careful and your political ideologies and leanings comes into play, which should not be the case, that might even influence the whole process of what you are exercise you are engaging in. So politicization can also become a very big challenge to that. And then also another issue is gaining access to the community can become very challenging. So for example, in an instance where you have to cross a river before you even get to the community, that can become a challenge where there are no boats, there are no canoes and all that. It can become very challenging. Or there's flooding, it has rained and there's flooding, right? That can become a challenge to you. So if you're not careful, you might not end up getting the right people to talk with, because the right people, before you get access to the right people, you need to cross the river before you get them. But there's no boats, there's no canoe and all that, so you cannot get access to the right people to talk to. So that can become a challenge. And then also, for instance, where if there's an instance of maybe curfew, if curfew hours are imposed and at a certain time you cannot be seen to moving around, that can hinder your movement. And once your movement is hindered, you cannot get the right people to talk to. So that becomes a challenge, right? So these are some of the challenges that you are likely to encounter. And then also challenges to data collection. Challenges to data collection, right? So one of it is if you have to talk to a large group of people, like I mentioned earlier, and you don't have the manpower, the resources at your disposal to 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 gather information from all these people, I mean that can become a challenge, right? Because once you take research assistants and field researchers who have to go, because you alone you cannot gather all that information, so you need to employ people, and you have to pay them. You have to pay them, train them, so that they'll be able to help you get this information. If you don't pay them well, they will not do the right job for you, and the data you get might be bad data, right? So that can become a challenge. And then also in the process of conducting the research, and then you keep interviewing people, and then you keep evoking their memories, right? You keep evoking their memories. You are asking them questions, I mean, that can evoke their memories, and I mean, give them some kind of psychological and emotional trauma and all that. That can become a challenge, right? So challenges to data collection is also, I mean, is also very is something that you definitely will encounter as a conflict analyst, or in an instance also some the people are not willing to talk. People are not willing to talk to you regarding the situation, so you will not get information. That in itself is also a challenge, because people are not ready to talk to you or give you information, right? That is a challenge, right? So basically, these are some of the challenges you encounter as a conflict analyst, right? Then finally, we move to how to conduct conflict analysis as a conflict expert or as a conflict analyst. So here we are looking at relevance of data to conflict analysis, right? So you've gone to the field to take data. We've looked at the challenges, but we're looking at the processes that you might go through to do the actual data collection, right? What are the relevance of the information you are getting to the conflict analysis process, right? So the benefits of the information you are getting. Why is the data very important? Because the data is very important because it provides a foundation for understanding and assessing the dynamics of the conflict, right? So the data is going to help you to understand the actual situation on the ground, right? So it gives you some kind of information as to what is actually causing the conflict, what is driving the conflict, right? So the first relevance of the data is that it helps to inform your understanding of the situation. It provides you information about the conflict, the historical context, the parties involved, the key events, and then the underlying causes. So you have some information that helps you to understand all these issues at play. And then is another benefit of the data is that it helps you to identify the root causes and the triggers of the conflict. So what is the root cause? So the root cause is the cause a political issue? Is it an economic issue? Is it a cultural issue? Right? It helps you to understand all the root causes and the triggers of the conflict. So maybe the root cause of it is that probably it's a tribal or ethnic conflict emanating from who to be the right overlord, or who is the right ruler of the community, right? So probably that's where the conflict emanated from. Then, as it emanated, then it evolved. Then other issues triggered the conflict. So maybe ownership of natural resources on a certain parcel of land, right? That also trigger the conflict. Then also maybe political undertones, where one faction believes that uh, the other group is being sponsored or being supported by the government. All this information will help you to understand all these dynamics before you even start assessing, the situation. So the data is very important in conflict analysis. Another relevance of it is also that it helps you to assess the impact of the conflict. So assessing the impact includes that maybe how many lives have been lost, how many properties have been destroyed, how many social amenities that have been destroyed, right? So the data helps you to get information on all this. So for example, maybe the data might show you that, well, this year alone, probably about 250 people have died as a result of the conflict. And this largely includes probably about 150 women and children, and the remaining are men. So the data will help you to get access all this information, so that if at the end of the day, if you want to make any recommendation to the government, well, you see that, well, based on the data available, a lot more women and children are dying. So what recommendation can we put in place so that the death of men, women and children will be minimized? Or maybe social infrastructure or amenities are being destroyed, schools are being destroyed. So at the end of the day, children do not get the opportunity to go to schools. Hospitals and clinics are being bent, so people cannot get access to all these social, amenities. So at the end of the day, then what will be your recommendation if the data is showing that all these things are not there? Then your recommendation will be largely geared towards improving all this information, improving the social amenities that the data has pointed you to, right? So if at the end of the day, the data is showing that, well, maybe unemployment, if the people are gainfully employed, you don't think someone will have the time to go and be killing, his or her neighbor? If people have good jobs to be doing, no one will waste it her time to go and be hiding in the bush and to ambush people and be killing them. So maybe then the recommendation will be that, well, then let's let the government create some sustainable jobs and employ the people so that people will be busy, because they're saying that the devil finds job for the idle hand, right? So if the people are working, you maybe definitely it's going to minimize the impact of the confrontation within the community, right? And then another relevance of it is that it helps you to map the actors and the relationship that exists among them. So the data will be able to point to you who are the individuals or the actors involved in the conflict, and what is the relationship that exists among these people. So party A, party B, these are the actors. What is the relationship among these people, right? What are the power dynamics? And how can we identify potential entry points for peace building and conflict resolution? So you identify the actors in the conflict. So once you identify them, your aim or goal is to ensure that how can we bring these two people to the discussion table, so that we can understand from both parties what their position and interests are, and where can we draw the line so that both of them will come to an agreement, so that there can be peace. So the data for conflict analysis is very important because it gives you exposure to all these nuances that are at play, so that when you are trying to engage in any form of analysis, you target the relevant aspects of the data and then you deal with it, right? So basically, those are the relevance. And then another relevance is also that it helps you to monitor and gives you early warning signs, right? So monitoring and early warning signs. So it helps you to identify potential flashpoints. So if the data is showing that maybe the flashpoints are probably from this community, then what do we do to ensure that we quell any kind of threat the flashpoints might pose? Okay, then, well, let's put a curfew in those communities that are noted to be the flashpoint, or where the violence usually emanate from. So maybe you put a curfew there, surveillance, patrol, and all those things. So the data gives you all this information so that you'll be able to work on areas that probably might be threats to the existence of individuals and the community as a whole, right? So you're able to monitor and then put in place measures to deal with any threat that might emerge from whatever flashpoints we've identified or from whatever situation that might occur, right? And then the data also helps you to assess the intervention strategies. So what strategies can you put in place? Well, one of the strategies maybe that the data might give you. So the data gives you that, well, people conceal their weapons in their fugu. So one of the strategies I think that was put in place some time back was that people should not be riding motorbikes, and then people should not be wearing fugu because people conceal their weapons in their fugu and all that. So those are some strategies that you can adapt to help you deal with the conflict situation, right? So having identified the relevance of the data, what are the methods that you can employ to collect the data as a conflict analyst? What are the methods or the processes that you may go through to collect data from the field, right? So one of the first steps you need to take note or you need to employ is that you need to define your goal. So your objective, what is your objective? What do you want to achieve at the end of the day, right? So define your goal and objectives. So maybe probably at the end of the day, one of the objectives is that probably at the end of the day, you want to identify the flashpoints within the communities where there are threats, right? So you define your goal. So once you define your goal, it becomes targeted. So once you are going to collect data, your focus is on identifying flashpoints where always threat emanates, right? So it gives you a clear focus on what you want to do, right? Because if you don't define your goals and your objectives, you might be engaging in a wild goose chase. You'll just be going about taking all manner of information, which might not even at the end of the day be relevant, right? So once you define your goals, you are clear in your mind. You know what you are interested in, so you are focused. So you go directly to the target, what you are interested in. Once you do that, it aids. It helps you to get the accurate and right information that you need, right? So if you want to identify the flashpoint, so you go into the community. Well, we want to identify the flashpoint. Community leaders can help you. Individuals can even give you information that, well, these are the places that the conflict usually happens. Or maybe you want to identify the time at which people usually, engage in the reprisal attacks and all that. So maybe you identify that maybe probably those shootings and killings usually occurs in the evening between 4 and whatever time, right? So then at the end of the day, once that goal is clear, you go there and through your research, you realize that, indeed, the killings usually occur between a certain time period. So at the end of the day, your recommendations will be that, well, during this time period, when you were in the community, you spoke to maybe 100 people. 99 of those people are saying that the killings usually occur between this time and this time. So what then can we do to minimize the killings? Well, let's put in place a curfew so that we restrict movement. Once movement is restricted, in a way, the killings was going to be minimized and all that. So you need to clearly define your goals, what you are interested in. Then you aim at that and then you focus and then get information relating to that. Then also you need to define the participants and the sources of the data. Who are the people you want to interview, right? Who are the participants you want to involve in? Do you want to involve ordinary community members? opinion leaders, stakeholders. So the stakeholders might either be government, stakeholders, so the security forces, NGOs, and all that. So you need to define, you need to have in mind who are the people you want to talk to. And then also you need to know the data sources. Where do you want to get your information from? Are you just relying on what the people will tell you, or you also want to consult the archives, the historical archives, to get historical evidence? Or do you also want to consult, maybe probably you want to look at judicial rulings? So you go to the courts, and then you look at the various rulings. So the data sources are also very important, because maybe you don't want to end up talking to only the people, because then maybe all the people might tell you might be a bit biased or skewed. So then you want to get a secondary source to probably either confirm what the people are saying, or judicial rulings and all things, to probably confirm or deny what the individuals or the participants are telling you, right? And then also, so the scale. So when you want to look at the data sources, you need to look at the scale, right? The scale is how many people you want to talk to, right? That can determine the kind of analysis you want to do. If you want to talk to multiple people, it means you are going to do some kind of robust analysis that might take a bit of time, right? Compared to maybe if you want to just talk to people. If you just want to talk to people, you are interviewing them, then you come and report on what they are saying. Maybe that might not be robust enough, because this is what people are telling you. But what are other sources that you can use to back what the people are telling you? So this can be the other secondary sources I've mentioned, the judicial rulings, the historical archives, and all that. And then what the relevance of the data? You need to ensure that the data sources you are using is very relevant. Of course, the judicial rulings are very relevant, because whatever the especially the Supreme Court says becomes law. So that is law, and we are all governed by law. So the relevance of the data is very important, because then you want to see, or you want to trace the history behind, some of these sources. And then how reliable and verifiable are these sources, right? Those sources will have to be very reliable, and then they have to be very verifiable. Those are verifiable facts that are there that you can confirm, right? And once they are verifiable, it means they are reliable. And then also designing the data collection approach. So how do you want to go about taking the data? Do you want to do a desk review? So desk review here means that you sit at the comfort of your home, you go onto your computer, you start searching for literature. So you look for online information online. So you go online. So if it's academic records, maybe you want to use Google Scholar to look for information regarding the conflict. What have previous people written about the conflict, right? Or you want to do surveys. So the survey here is that you want to administer questionnaire to people. So you print your questionnaire, and then you take to people to fill it out for you and then answer for you. Or you want to do interviews, right? You want to interview individuals. So you want to interview government officers. So you want to interview ministers, political leaders, community leaders, chiefs, and queen mothers and all those people. So that's what we call key stakeholder interviews. You talk to the people one-on-one. Or you want to do a focus group discussion. So with a focus group discussion, you bring about 6 or 10 people together at one place, and you ask each and every one of them question one after the other. That is what we call a focus group discussion. right? Or you want to organize capacity building workshops. So you organize a workshop and then you bring various individuals together and then you talk to them and then you get information from them based on the conflict. So you rent a venue and then you bring all these people together to the venue and then you can interact with them to get information from them, right? So that those are some ways you can use in collecting the information from the people, right? So we've talked about the data collection. So that's what we just mentioned. So these are the data collection procedures. So any one of the approaches that you want to use, it's up to you on what you want to do. So then you analyze the data. So the analysis is also very important. What kind of analysis are you going to run? So if you do a survey where you use a questionnaire, you have to analyze the data. So are you going to use SPSS? Are you going to use data to analyze the information? If you use interviews, if you interview the people, you have to transcribe the data because you will record. So you have to transcribe. Once you transcribe, how are you going to analyze it? Are you going to analyze it thematically and all that? So the analysis of the data is also very important. Then after you've analyzed the data, you write your report. You write your report, what you found. That when you went into the community, you spoke to the people. This is what you found. This is the information you got. This is what the people are saying. Then you, at the end of the day, you disseminate the report. So after writing the report, you disseminate the report. So either you disseminate to the government, you send it to the government, you send it to the National Peace Council, or whichever place you want to disseminate the report to, right? So, yeah, basically that is it with the data collection, the methods of data collection. So you disseminate the report. So like in the case of the Otumfo committee, the report was sent to the presidency, and then later it was made known to the public. So it depends on which approach works for you. You want to disseminate the report through. You can also organize workshops and then disseminate the report there. Yeah. So basically, that is what we have with the methods of data collection for conflict analysis. So that is all for now. So if you have any question, please any question?
No, sir.
Okay, so I think that will be all for this week. So hopefully next week we'll meet and then we'll continue. So thank you for your time.
Welcome, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
All right.
You're
Bye.
welcome, sir. Normally, to know what make the amount of it. So,
Sure. Na one no. Ya bwana obia ayewa interested. Ebe wono bi tena na obi ba na sima sanate. What is me dem no boy. Me ne we na team. Me ne okoli na team. There's no way say on better ne ba ne be ha. But most of them more to say more I don't understand. The way we ba na we ba na wagin na wagin no from na mo yes is in
Mimi sende muna mwe kumusha lana biya sabusa bajina.
so no say obi ba na wo say obegin no onim say na woti na wo no bi na ide